بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل على سيدنا مولانا Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa ajmain. My name is Ustad Abu Ayub and welcome to an episode of Our History where we will learn about some of the very special stories from our Islamic history, our past, including individuals and great events from the past. Right now today, I am standing in front of a very, very special place. I'm here in Istanbul, Turkey, and I'm at the resting place of none other than one of the very special and close companions of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, none other than Abu Ayub Al-Ansari radiallahu anhu, who's buried just beyond the white walls of this masjid. And he came here during the time of the Khilafah of Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan radiallahu anhu. So join me today as we explore the life of Abu Ayub Al-Ansari and get to visit the inside of his masjid, inshallah, and the surrounding area that we're in as well. Let's go. We're now about to enter the maqam of Abu Ayub Al-Ansari radiallahu anhu. We're also going to see some of the sacred relics of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, although Abu Ayub Al-Ansari radiallahu anhu is famously known by that name, he was born Khalid ibn Zayd and he was a member of the Banu Khazraj. Now, the Banu Khazraj was one of the two major Arab tribes of the city of Medina, which was formerly called Al-Yathrib. Abu Ayub Al-Ansari radiallahu anhu first meets the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam when he's part of a delegation that comes from Medina to the city of Mecca and greets the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam at Aqaba. There he makes a pledge with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and that is also where that delegation from the city of Medina invite the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam to come back with them to Medina and leave Mecca. Eventually, the Prophet ﷺ is granted permission to leave the city of Mecca and make his hijrah to the city of Medina, which he does so with his companion Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu. And they famously cross over the desert and finally reach the city of Medina. And here is where Abu Ayub Al-Ansari is famously remembered in our history. During this time, the Prophet ﷺ, as he nears the city of Medina, all of the people of Medina, the citizens of Medina, the women, the men, the children, all come out to greet the Prophet ﷺ. Every one of them is also inviting the Prophet ﷺ to stay with them and in their homes. And here the Prophet ﷺ decides to dismount his camel and allows the she-camel Qaswa to walk through the city of Medina, and he tells the people that Qaswa is guided by Allah. Wherever she stops and sits, this is where the Prophet ﷺ would stop and stay. Qaswa walks through the city of Medina and stops right in front of the home of Abu Ayub Al-Ansari radiallahu anhu. Runs to the camel, he races there, he grabs the baggage, grabs the saddle off of Qaswa's back, and he rushes to his home. And that is when the Prophet ﷺ says that a person, a traveler, stays where his baggage is. And so Al-Ansari would be the host of the Prophet ﷺ for 7 months according to our tradition. And we have many beautiful stories of how the family of Abu Ayub Al-Ansari accommodated the Prophet ﷺ, how their relationship grew over this period of time, his love and his service and his honoring of the Prophet ﷺ. So close to the Prophet ﷺ that according to many of the ulama, Abu Ayub Al-Ansari is granted a name by the Sahaba, and they call him Habibullah, which means the beloved of Allah. And in this capacity, he serves the Prophet, he attends to the Prophet, he feeds the Prophet, looks after the Prophet, sits with the Prophet, walks with the Prophet, goes out with the Prophet, prays with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam for that entire duration and beyond. And when the Prophet ﷺ is granted permission to go out in jihad fi sabilillah, Abu Ayub Al-Ansari is also one who accompanies the Prophet ﷺ, not just in the campaign of Badr, but also at the Battle of Uhud, the Battle of the Trench, the Fath of Mecca and other battles. It is from the time of the Prophet ﷺ to the time of the Khilafah of Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan radiallahu anhu. Abu Ayub Al-Ansari participates in every single battle. And they say that if he was not fighting in a battle, the reason was because he was fighting in another one. Some 40 years after the death of the Prophet ﷺ, Abu Ayub Al-Ansari learns that an army is being prepared to come to the city of Constantinople. And at the age of 90, Abu Ayub Al-Ansari leaves the blessed city of Medina and marches with that army to Constantinople in order to fulfill this beautiful hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, in which the Prophet ﷺ said, لا تفتحن قسطنطينية فلنعم أمير أميرها ولنعم جيش ذلك الجيش, which means that Constantinople will be opened. How blessed its leader will be, and how blessed that army will be. After months of crossing rivers, traveling over mountains, and going through ravines, the Muslim army of 30,000 arrives here at the city of Constantinople, only to be faced by these incredible walls. Now, the walls you see behind me protected this city for 1,000 years. It was first built by the Roman Emperor Constantine, followed by numerous expansions and renovations by the likes of Emperor Theodosius as well as Justinian. The Muslim army of 30,000 camps on the outskirts of this wall, and accompanying this army is at least 1,000 other Sahaba radiallahu anhum, mentioned by the scholars and mentioned in the text. Among those who may have possibly come here with Abu Ayub Al-Ansari radiallahu anhu are the likes of Abdullah ibn Abbas, the cousin of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Abu Shayba al-Khudri, the milk brother of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Abdullah ibn Umar, the son of Umar radiallahu anhu, as well as others, 1,000 of them who may have come here to the walls of the city in order to fulfill the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, what they were not expecting was how fiercely the Romans would defend these walls, and every attack by the Muslim army that they sent against these walls was thrown back, defeated, and in confusion. Every time that the Muslims planned to negotiate with the Romans would simply refuse those negotiations and not surrender the city. And for 7 months, the battle raged on the outsides of these walls. There were several instances where the Muslims penetrated through these walls, although it was fleeting. This section, for example, houses the grave of at least 4 of the Sahaba radiallahu anhum jamiyan, who were able to enter. However, they got stuck between the first wall and the second wall of the city. Abu Ayub Al-Ansari's dream of fulfilling the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ would never materialize. Wounded and sick with illness, Abu Ayub Al-Ansari would pass away just outside of the walls of the city. Soon after, the Muslim army would retire back to Arabia. After his death, Abu Ayub Al-Ansari radiallahu anhu was buried just behind me. The Muslim army fulfilled his wish of being buried as close to the walls as possible. And following his burial, just before the Muslim army was to retire and leave this land, and it would take another 8 centuries before a Muslim army would return here, just before they left, they told the Romans, who were the masters of this land at that period, do not destroy or disturb any of our graves, any of our sacred places, for if you do, no single church bell will ring in our lands. And so the Muslim army goes back to Arabia. Abu Ayub Al-Ansari radiallahu anhu, on the other hand, there will be mention of him in a number of texts of the travelers. Various scholars will also make mention of the grave of Abu Ayub Al-Ansari outside of the walls of Constantinople, but it would take 8 centuries, 800 years before a young Ottoman prince, the 7th generation grandson of Ertugrul Ghazi, who comes here in 1453 and is honored with the fulfillment of the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And it is this young Sultan Muhammad al-Fatih, who comes here after the victory of opening up the city of Constantinople, he comes here to this place and he finds the grave of Abu Ayub Al-Ansari. And from that moment, the people here of this land, they have a saying and they have a tradition, which goes to the effect that everything begins and ends with Ayub. And what this means is that when a person comes and visits the city of Istanbul or the city of Constantinople, the first place that they come to is visit the grave of Abu Ayub Al-Ansari. And when a person leaves the city, they don't leave until they visit the grave of Abu Ayub Al-Ansari radiallahu anhu. And to this day, thousands of people converge on this place to respect and honor the life of this very, very special Sahabi, who was the host of the Prophet ﷺ, who was an Ansar, who was the neighbor of the Prophet ﷺ, the flag bearer of the Prophet ﷺ, who assisted and attended with the Prophet ﷺ on many of his ghazawat ﷺ, who came out here in order to fulfill the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, and who dies as a shaheed and is now remembered as Ayub Sultan, the rightful sultan and ruler of this land. Ayub Al-Ansari radiallahu anhu traveled 2,000 miles to be buried here in the city of Constantinople, leaving his beloved home of Medina to Munawwara. This makes me wonder, where will we end up? Join me for another episode of our history, inshallah. Stay tuned. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.